The Utopian Illusion. For the first 72 hours, the world experiences a state of unprecedented, intoxicating euphoria. The massive concrete walls, barbed wire fences, and militarized checkpoints that once divided humanity are aggressively dismantled by cheering crowds. Passports and visas, once the ultimate symbols of geopolitical restriction and systemic inequality, are thrown into massive bonfires. Families separated by arbitrary lines drawn by dead politicians are finally reunited. The media broadcasts a unified message of global brotherhood, declaring that humanity has finally evolved past its primitive, tribalistic origins. You can walk anywhere. You can live anywhere. But this intoxicating freedom is a deadly, blinding illusion. Beneath the surface of these global celebrations, the quiet, invisible scaffolding of modern civilization is beginning to fracture. Without border control, there is no regulation of mass movement, no tracking of criminal elements, and no way to manage the immediate, overwhelming strain on local infrastructure. The utopian dream feels incredibly real, but it is merely the calm before a catastrophic storm of unparalleled human displacement and systemic collapse. The Great Migration. By the end of the first week, the euphoria violently evaporates as the largest mass migration in human history begins. With no legal barriers to entry, billions of people immediately abandon impoverished or unstable regions, surging toward the wealthiest and most developed areas of the former world. Cities originally engineered to sustain a maximum of 10 million people are suddenly suffocated by the arrival of 50 million desperate travelers. The physical infrastructure simply cannot handle the sheer mathematical weight of this influx. Highways transform into permanent, gridlocked parking lots, stretching for hundreds of miles. The electrical grids in these highly sought-after destination zones aggressively overload and fail under the sudden, impossible demand, plunging entire megacities into absolute darkness. Clean municipal water reservoirs are drained completely dry within a matter of days. The sanitation systems back up, flooding the streets with disease. The beautiful, borderless utopia rapidly degrades into a suffocating, hyper-dense trap where the basic necessities for human survival are mathematically impossible to secure for the overwhelming population. The death of jurisdiction. As the infrastructure shatters, the abstract concept of the law completely disintegrates. Without defined geographical borders, there are absolutely no jurisdictions. If a violent crime is committed in this new global void, whose specific laws actually apply? Who commands and pays the local police forces when there is no longer a national government to collect taxes or issue authority? Within 2 weeks, law enforcement officers simply abandon their posts, realizing they are risking their lives for a state apparatus that literally no longer exists. Federal prisons and maximum security facilities are left entirely unguarded, releasing millions of hardened, organized criminals directly into the chaotic waves of global migration. The noble, philosophical idea of universal human rights dies instantly the moment there is no physical, localized authority left to actively enforce them. Justice becomes a purely localized physical transaction decided by whoever holds the most power in a given city block. Society reverts to the brutal, unforgiving law of the jungle, masked only briefly by the fading remnants of a civilized world that has lost its foundation. The vengeance of history? This is the exact moment the utopian dream descends into pure, unadulterated horror. We realize too late that borders did not just separate human beings, they acted as vital, heavily armed quarantine zones for centuries of historical rage. Without these physical and diplomatic barriers, the buffer zones between deeply entrenched geopolitical enemies vanish overnight. The militarized line separating Pakistan and India dissolves, and decades of nuclear tension spilled directly into an ungoverned, chaotic civilian melee. Russian and Ukrainian populations are suddenly forced to occupy a completely unregulated, shared geographic void, reigniting brutal localized warfare. The vast distances and borders previously shielding Iran, Israel, and the United States evaporate into a stateless storm of violence and proxy retaliation. Meanwhile, China and Taiwan collide violently without any international diplomatic framework or treaty to stop the inevitable fire. We did not magically erase the deep-rooted hatred, religious divides, or historical grievances of humanity. We simply removed the safety glass, allowing all the world's most explosive conflicts to detonate simultaneously. The economic hemorrhage. By the end of the first month, the highly complex global economy flatlines entirely. Fiat currency, which is essentially paper money backed solely by the promise and authority of a specific government, becomes completely and utterly worthless. Why would a merchant accept a United States dollar, a British pound, or a European euro when the nations that printed them have been officially dissolved? The entire concept of digital banking and international finance evaporates into the ether. Global trade grinds to a devastating halt because there are no longer any customs agencies, regulated tariffs, or naval authorities to guarantee the safe, secure passage of cargo ships across the oceans. The massive, intricate global supply chain that delivers microchips, medical supplies, and raw materials is completely shattered. Almost overnight, the modern financial world is violently dragged backward, forcing panicked citizens to plunge into a primitive, highly unstable physical barter system, where only tangible goods like food, ammunition, and raw survival tools hold any real value in the new, unregulated marketplace.
The resource wars. As the reality of the dead global supply chain sets in, the hyper-populated destination zones realize a terrifying mathematical truth. They cannot possibly feed themselves. The massive industrial grocery stores are stripped completely bare within hours by panicked, desperate crowds. Without international borders to regulate, negotiate, and protect the complex export and import of vital resources like wheat, oil, and life-saving pharmaceuticals, intense localized hoarding begins. Desperate, starving populations realize very quickly that the only viable way to secure the rapidly depleting remaining food and water is to take it by absolute, brutal physical force. The philosophical concept of the peaceful global citizen dies a rapid death, and the desperate, ruthless survivor is aggressively born. Neighborhoods turn into fortified war zones, battling block by block over access to a single functioning water well or a remaining stockpile of canned goods. Compassion is entirely replaced by the cold, calculated necessity of caloric survival in a world that has consumed everything.
The psychological shattering. By month 6, the true psychological toll of this global experiment takes its final, devastating form. Human beings are inherently, biologically tribal creatures. Our evolutionary psychology is deeply wired to require a distinct us and a clear them for basic survival. When the grand, abstract concept of a unified nation is deleted from our collective consciousness, we do not magically become one big, peaceful global family. Instead, we aggressively regress. Society violently fragments into thousands of hyper-defensive, localized micro-factions based entirely on physical proximity, shared religious beliefs, or sheer militaristic strength. The profound paranoia of the unknown drives these new, primitive tribes to view absolutely everyone outside their immediate controlled circle as a deadly, existential threat. Trust becomes the most dangerous vulnerability a person can possess. The human mind simply cannot process the overwhelming scale of a borderless world, so it forcefully shrinks its reality down to the brutal, hyper-vigilant defense of a single street an apartment building, or a small fortified compound.
Rebirth in the rubble. 1 year after the borders fell, the grand, idealistic experiment is officially over. The utopian dream of a completely borderless, unrestricted world has resulted in unprecedented global bloodshed, starvation, and a horrifying societal regression back to the Dark Ages. In the grim, smoldering rubble of the old world, the deeply exhausted, traumatized survivors begin doing the exact only thing that makes them feel a shred of physical safety again. They start gathering heavy stones from the ruins. They start cutting down trees and forging crude iron fences. They aggressively begin building primitive, localized walls around their newly established microsettlements. They reinvent the armed checkpoint, fiercely guarding their limited resources from outsiders. The survivors of this global collapse learn the darkest, most profoundly sobering truth of all. Humanity did not construct borders just to keep other people out of spite. We meticulously built them because they were the only effective mechanism to keep our own inherent chaos at bay. The borders return, but this time they are soaked in blood.